I'm VJ Hamilton and welcome to the Autoimmune RESET, the place for you to learn how to thrive with autoimmune disease and feel empowered to take steps to transform your health to feel better than ever. You can start making changes today to improve your health. So with every episode, my mission is to share with you simple ways to up-level your diet and lifestyle with key learnings from my own journey reversing autoimmune disease and inspirational stories from those who have reset their autoimmune symptoms and are now thriving in life. I suffered from autoimmune disease for over 25 years and now I live symptom-free, and I wish the same for you as well. So thank you for being here and sharing this time with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Autoimmune RESET podcast. I'm your host VJ Hamilton. I'm a nutritionist, scientist and expert in autoimmune disease. And today I want to talk to you about a very rare autoimmune condition called stiff person syndrome. And they believe that this condition is an autoimmune condition, but as with lots of rare autoimmune conditions, they don't know precisely the mechanisms involved, and there is certainly more research needed. But I wanted to talk to you about this today because I watched Celine Dion's documentary and I grew up listening to Celine Dion. I absolutely love her music. I love her as a person as well. She is just such an incredible person, so warm, so honest. And when I watched her documentary, I Am Celine Dion, where it was talking about the fact that she has stiff person syndrome and how that has changed her life. And it is a very honest and revealing portrayal of what she's going through. And not everybody has to do this. She didn't have to do it. And I know there are people like Michael J. Fox who talks openly about his condition. He was even on Glastonbury recently with Coldplay. And I just love that we are seeing more of the experiences that people have with chronic illness, and we need to normalize it. And as much as I want to help people as much as possible to reverse their symptoms, I also would like for anyone with a chronic illness, and to be honest, a lot of these are invisible illnesses. I had chronic fatigue syndrome. A lot of people wouldn't have realised that. I had alopecia, but I covered it up. And if you have skin issues, you normally find some clothing to cover that up. But should it be that way, or should we just feel that we can go out into society and be accepted regardless of our symptoms, regardless of the way we look, and that just becomes more acceptable? And I think in the past, the truth is this has been hidden away. And that's why I love these honest accounts through people like Celine Dion, who is just this huge international star, an artist, and she has had such success throughout her career, and she is now able to share what it is like going through this stiff person syndrome that she has been diagnosed with. And she has been living with symptoms for a long time. So when I heard that she'd been diagnosed, I actually thought that she had just been diagnosed with a condition. But as we know, if you have a chronic illness or an autoimmune condition, you can have symptoms for a very long time and not get diagnosed. And I know that happened with me with chronic fatigue syndrome. I had no idea what was happening to me when I was a teenager. I just knew that I didn't have as much energy as my friends. I knew that I needed lots of sleep. I knew that when I did exercise, it took me days, sometimes even weeks to recover. And I just thought that was who I was, but that was a symptom of my condition and I hadn't realised it at the time. So the more awareness that we have of these conditions, the better. I want to speak to you about stiff person syndrome as well, because as much as it is an extremely rare autoimmune condition, I think understanding the concepts of how these conditions can cause symptoms is important, especially when it comes to systemic autoimmune conditions like scleroderma and lupus and Sjogren's syndrome, and a lot of these conditions that don't just affect one organ, they affect different systems in the body. And again, that can be very hard to be diagnosed, because if you've got dry eyes and you've got dry skin and you've got something going on with your nails and your breathing isn't as good as it could be, the first place somebody isn't going to look is Sjogren's syndrome, but you may have Sjogren's syndrome with those symptoms. And it is piecing all these symptoms together that can be helpful and give you that insight of what might be going on in the body. And that's why I wanted to talk about stiff person syndrome, because this is also a systemic autoimmune condition, and it's the effect that it has on neurotransmitters in the brain, which is why this is happening. So it has the presentation of spasms and issues with muscle contraction, but the truth is that is coming from the brain. And understanding that does help with lots of neurological conditions and autoimmune conditions of how they work. So you might be listening to this thinking, well, I don't have stiff person syndrome, so is this going to be valuable for me to listen to? And I honestly believe it is. And to be honest, it's just interesting to hear about these different conditions, because there are lots of rare autoimmune conditions and they work in quite similar ways. Stiff person syndrome is a condition that is a progressive neurological disorder, and it's characterized by severe muscle stiffness and spasms. And these symptoms primarily will affect the trunk and the limbs, and they can cause a huge amount of discomfort and disability that will appear gradually normally. So you'll start with just quite subtle symptoms, and then over time they can become more severe, and that can affect your quality of life and actually stop you from doing normal daily activity as a result of that. Now, as this is a rare condition, there is not a huge amount of understanding about what causes it. And I believe Celine Dion has invested a lot of money in the Colorado hospital to actually look into finding a cure for stiff person syndrome. So that is another reason that having somebody like Celine Dion who is willing to make investments into the research is again very helpful, because when there are more rare conditions, the investment in the research behind what causes them and medications for them and natural therapies for them probably isn't going to be as much as a priority as conditions that are affecting a lot more people. Even though the precise cause and mechanisms isn't fully understood, what they do believe with stiff person syndrome is that it's associated with antibodies against the glutamic acid decarboxylase. And I'm just going to refer to that as GAD, because GAD is an enzyme that's critical for the production of gamma aminobutyric acid, which is also known as GABA. And you may have heard of GABA before. I've certainly spoken about it before, because it's a neurotransmitter that inhibits the excitatory path of the nervous system. So GABA is really important for good quality sleep, because on a night we want to calm down our nervous system, and GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, so that means it helps calm the nervous system down. And there are lots of different nutrients that can help to produce GABA. I know you can take GABA specifically, but I always like to support systems in the body that help us produce these things ourselves, because naturally we can produce them. And I really love L-theanine. I started experimenting with my sleep a while ago, and I started taking lots of different nutrients and trialing them, and I've still got a few other ones to trial actually. But I started taking L-theanine and magnesium glycinate, and the improvement in my sleep was so significant that I haven't really moved on since then. I have tried a few other things, but my sleep quality is so good as a result of having both magnesium and L-theanine, and that is because it helps to produce GABA, and GABA helps to calm down the nervous system. So I specifically don't think I have an issue with getting to sleep or sleep itself, but my issue has always been calming myself down, because I am quite an excitatory type person, I would say, and I think I am more inclined to have a heightened sympathetic nervous system, and that's the nervous system that we need to calm down in the body. And when it comes to stiff person syndrome, this antibody that is targeting this enzyme which produces GABA means that GABA production decreases, and there is a loss of that inhibitory control over muscle movements that we all need. And that results in the hallmark symptoms of stiff person syndrome, which is muscle rigidity, spasms, and heightened sensitivity to stimuli such as noise, touch, and emotional stress. And I find that a lot of my clients who have chronic fatigue syndrome also have this heightened sensitivity to stimuli. That again is a hallmark of chronic fatigue syndrome. And I find a lot of my clients can't go to big group meetings, or they can't have a lot of stimuli from light and sound. And I know I was like that as well. I started avoiding those types of activities because it would just deplete me of energy. And I think when it comes to stiff person syndrome, it can cause a severe spasm. And if you have seen the Celine Dion documentary, you see her go into a seizure. And I'll have to say, it is quite tough to watch. But again, I'm quite thankful that she was willing to show that, because you see the severity of these conditions, and people might just think with stiff person syndrome it is affecting her muscles, and that's not great in and of itself, and that can hugely affect her quality of life. But on top of that, she's having these seizures because when you have a lot of stimuli, you are more at risk of spasms and seizures. And that's again because there isn't that GABA production to help calm everything down. So let's talk about the numbers with stiff person syndrome. As I said, it's incredibly rare. It affects 1 to 2 people per million. So it's really 1 in a million. But isn't Celine Dion 1 in a million in some very positive ways as well? Given its rarity, there are a lot of providers and practitioners who haven't come across it. And I'll be honest, I haven't worked with it. But I find the underlying root causes and the mechanisms that are involved very similar to some other autoimmune conditions, because as I said, they're affecting enzymes, they're affecting the receptors on the cells, they're affecting the cells themselves, they're affecting the organelles in the cells. So anything that is affecting something in that way, you have antibodies to any part of the cell. You may have antibodies to the DNA. You find that a lot with lupus. You might have antibodies to receptors on the cell, so that's affecting how the receptors work, and that can happen in things like Graves' disease. And you will have antibodies to enzymes as well, which cause a issue with production of certain vital compounds such as neurotransmitters, which is happening with stiff person syndrome. With stiff person syndrome, it does appear to affect women more, and that constitutes for about 2/3 of the diagnosis, and it typically presents in adults between the age of 30 and 60. However, it can affect anybody at any age. So due to its rarity, it's actually quite easy for it to be misdiagnosed, and many patients will receive diagnosis of common conditions like multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, or anxiety disorders when they actually have stiff person syndrome. Now, one of the most challenging aspects, I would say, with stiff person syndrome is this issue of overstimulation. And again, if you have seen the Celine Dion documentary, this is the part of it that really stood out to me. As much as it's affected every aspect of her life, and being the incredible singer that she is now unable to sing in the way she did before. And it's heartbreaking, to be honest. I think she is a remarkable woman regardless, but it is just sad because she was so talented. I've always loved her. I wish I'd seen her in concert, and maybe I will one day, because I am sure with the investment that she's making in the research and the work she's doing on herself, she may come out the other side of this. And she is determined, and I love her determination as well. That just struck me in the documentary, and that's why I have sympathy for her and empathy for her. But I know that she is going to make a huge change one way or the other when it comes to this condition, for herself and for others who are going through it as well. This overstimulation aspect of it does mean that it can create a lot of anxiety in those with stiff person syndrome, because when they have exposure to sensory inputs like sound, touch, and even emotional stress, then that can create a lot of issues, and it means that they can, as I said, go into seizures, and have severe muscle contractions as a result of that. So if we think about GABA and how it functions, it's the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter, and it works by reducing neuronal excitability. So that is when we're feeling very excited and we're feeling quite wired. You know, when you feel overstimulated, GABA can help with that, and it's effectively putting a brake on the nervous system. And when GABA production is impaired, as it is with stiff person syndrome, then this braking mechanism fails. So you can see if somebody is exposed to stimulation and they have nothing to help to neutralize that, then that can lead to issues. So without adequate GABA, then these neurons can fire excessively, and the excessive neuronal activity leads to muscle stiffness and spasms. And in a normal scenario, sensory inputs are processed smoothly, but in stiff person syndrome, these inputs can trigger an overreaction, which results in severe muscle contractions. And that's some of the symptoms that you see in the condition. And that's why movement and singing can become difficult. Due to the severe muscle spasms, this makes it just hard for anybody with stiff person syndrome to enjoy everyday life, because the stimuli all around us, it's just a normal part of life. And that can also create a lot of fear around the potentiality of these spasms happening. That's what Celine Dion is going through at the moment. She does have medication to help, and she is able to do more by the looks of it in the documentary, but she's still working on it a step at a time. Now, as I said, they believe that stiff person syndrome is an autoimmune disease because it's attacking the enzyme GAD, and that's often what happens in an autoimmune condition. Your immune system starts to attack something that your body is creating itself, like this enzyme or self-tissue. So that's why they believe there is this autoimmunity element to it. And it is frequently linked to other autoimmune conditions. For instance, many people who have stiff person syndrome also have type 1 diabetes or vitiligo. And as you may be aware, type 1 diabetes is where the immune system targets insulin producing cells in the pancreas, and that leads to high blood sugar levels because you need insulin to regulate your blood sugar levels. And similarly in vitiligo, the immune system attacks the melanocytes, and those melanocytes are responsible for the pigment that's produced by the skin. So given this link, you can see that there is this systemic dysregulation of the immune system that we see a lot in autoimmune disease. So when you are thinking about therapies for stiff person syndrome or any autoimmune condition, you need to be supporting the immune response, and we need to make sure that the immune system is responding appropriately to pathogens that enter our body and keeping them out of the body. But also we need to think about making sure that our immune system isn't reacting to things that our body is making or our self-tissue. And that's a key piece of it when it comes to any systemic autoimmune disease. So let's look at Celine Dion's diagnosis specifically around stiff person syndrome and talk about how this is affecting her singing. Because again, you might not think about having something like stiff person syndrome and it affecting your voice, but everything in our body relies on our muscles for the most part, and when our muscles stop working effectively, it can have an impact on lots of different areas and systems in the body. So stiff person syndrome causes this muscle stiffness and painful spasms, and that can particularly impact the trunk and the limbs, but for a singer this can extend to the muscles which are involved in breathing and vocal production. And I have dabbled in singing over my life, and I know how important the breathing aspect is when it comes to singing. So the muscle stiffness, especially around the diaphragm and chest, can make it difficult to control the breathing, which is absolutely essential when it comes to singing. It can make it hard to sustain those notes, and it can just mean that managing your vocal dynamics becomes a lot harder. It can also impact vocal control because, of course, when it comes to Celine Dion singing in particular, it requires precision and control over your vocal cords, your respiratory muscles and your posture. And when you have rigidity that is associated with stiff person syndrome, then this can lead to loss of that muscle control and that motor control that is required for your muscles. So it's hard to modulate pitch and volume and maintain vocal stability during performances. And I think that is what Celine Dion speaks to in the documentary, because she can sing, she just can't sing in the way she could before, and that's because there was so much power behind her voice and she had a lot of precision in the way she sang. And I've actually seen this in the Bon Jovi documentary as well. I don't know if you've seen that too, but he talks about how he has lost his voice over time, and he talks about the fact that he went through a stage in, quite recently in his career where he just wasn't able to sing that he did before, and he didn't want to ruin the legacy of Bon Jovi. And it's a different insight into a similar issue in the fact that he had this remarkable voice, and over time, through the wear and tear and other factors, he now has issues with his vocal cords. And it just shows you that, with Celine Dion, this is a systemic condition. I suppose with Bon Jovi, it's quite a different reason for him to have lost his voice, but it just shows how much goes into singing and how much training and support your voice needs. And I think I noticed that even singing in choir, to be honest. I was singing in choir and we had a performance coming up, and I ended up with COVID because somebody else in the choir had it and I must have caught it off them. And because of that, I was just thinking that my throat was sore because I'd been singing, and it was actually due to COVID. And I sang with COVID, and I don't think my vocal cords have been the same since, and they are just so delicate and anything can affect them. But with this stiff person syndrome, it's not just the effect it's having on the vocal cords themselves, but all the supporting organs and supporting systems to help Celine Dion sing. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, stiff person syndrome can lead to hypersensitivity. And when you are singing and there is noise and there is emotions of whatever you are singing, then that's going to increase stimuli, and that can cause the symptoms and spasms that you see in stiff person syndrome. And on top of that, it can just lead to muscle fatigue and pain, and that's just going to reduce stamina. Somebody as strong-willed as Celine Dion cannot move through this, because at the end of the day, if your body is not working for you in the way that it did before, you have to honour that and you have to accept it to a certain degree. And again, that's why I felt quite inspired by Celine's portrayal of living with stiff person syndrome, because she was still very determined, but at the same time, she knows she has to look after her body. She needs to rest. She can't do the things she did before. It doesn't mean she's never going to be able to do them again. It just means at this moment in time, she needs to look after herself. That's what happens with a lot of these autoimmune conditions. I find a lot of people are almost grieving their old life. And I think the acceptance piece is important. And I got to a point of accepting, where I was in my journey at that point in time. But I always had hope and I always had faith that I could get better and that I could improve things. And I think that's an important piece of it as well. So rather than accepting and thinking this is, the end of me, accepting where you currently are is important, but also thinking, okay, these are the steps I need to take to start feeling better. And that's what I did, just taking it a step at a time. And that can really pay off in the long run. And I got that impression from Celine Dion as well. So what can you do if you have stiff person syndrome? Well, there are some pharmacological treatments, primarily benzodiazepines such as diazepam, which can enhance the GABAergic activity and help reduce muscle rigidity. But there are also immunotherapies which can help to reduce the autoimmune response, because as I said, it is believed that there is an autoimmune response going on, and it looks as though the immune system is targeting the GABA enzyme, which is causing a low production of GABA. There are studies suggest that magnesium supplements may help to alleviate muscle stiffness and cramps, so that might be a nutrient to focus on and at least get tested for, and to see if you're deficient in that nutrient, because magnesium acts as a natural muscle relaxant, and it certainly helps me relax on a night, and it's really helped my sleep as well. Vitamin D levels are linked to lots of different autoimmune conditions. If you haven't checked your vitamin D levels and you have an autoimmune condition, I would say that's one of the first things to check, because vitamin D is so vital in immune tolerance, and that means when your immune system isn't firing up against self-tissue and these different compounds in the body that it shouldn't be, and when you have vitamin D deficiency, it causes immune system dysregulation, which is why it's absolutely vital to have optimal amounts of vitamin D if you have an autoimmune disease. You can also incorporate foods that help to increase GABA levels. So if you have stiff person syndrome, or you have any condition that means that you are less likely to produce GABA, and that can be for various reasons, but eating foods that help to enhance GABA levels in the body can be helpful. And I mentioned L-theanine, and L-theanine is in green tea. And I absolutely love green tea. I didn't always love green tea, but I got into it, and at first when I tasted it, it tasted really bitter to me and not very nice. And then over time, I absolutely love it now, and I can't bear starting my day without a green tea. I take it on holiday with me. I take it on business trips with me. I just have to have that cup of green tea in the morning. It has all these amazing benefits as well. I also like to incorporate matcha into things, and I will routinely have my matcha detox smoothie. If you'd like the recipe, feel free to get in contact. But I'm having that regularly as well, and I feel incorporating matcha or green tea into my daily meal plan is good, and it certainly feels like it is helping with my stress response. And this is particularly important for somebody with stiff person syndrome who isn't creating enough GABA in the body. And then when it comes to stiff person syndrome or any systemic autoimmune condition, the anti-inflammatory diet is going to be a key piece of that. I do have some anti-inflammatory recipes which you can download. I will put the link in the show notes, and you can take part in the anti-inflammatory challenge, which I run live last week, but you will have the option to go through that yourself. So if you'd like to download the anti-inflammatory recipes, there will be the link in the show notes, and you can also take part in that challenge. But bringing in anti-inflammatory foods into your diet is going to help to bring down any inflammation. And because we know inflammation is such a trigger for autoimmune disease, it is important to be incorporating those foods into your diet daily as well. And then you can explore other areas. If you have an autoimmune condition, looking into your gut health is absolutely key. We know that imbalances in the gut can lead to autoimmune disease, and there are various things that can be going on in the gut. You can have bacterial dysbiosis, you might have candida present, there may be inflammation and leaky gut syndrome. So there are various factors to look at, and they can all be worked at in a specific and individualized way, dependent on where those imbalances are for you in the gut. And I would say, after reviewing hundreds of stool test results, that everybody is different and everybody has a different fact pattern. And that is why when I'm working with a client and they have gut issues, and sometimes they don't even have digestive symptoms, when we do the stool test, we can work on their imbalances. So do they have a pathogen, or do they have no growth of Akkermansia, or do they have some inflammation that's linked to a food sensitivity? And then we work on that specifically, and that can help bring down inflammation in the body and help to reduce the autoimmune response that is going on. On top of that, looking at stress levels. Stress is very much interlinked with chronic illness, chronic fatigue syndrome, and also autoimmune disease. So working out what is going on with your stress response is key. Have you got a high level of cortisol? Are you going through your day with a very high level of stress and just living in that chronic state of stress? Are you at the point where your body's not producing as much cortisol anymore, or your body's not responding to cortisol anymore? And as a result, you are just flat all day long. You just don't have that get up and go, and you don't have a spike in cortisol at the beginning of the day. And that can help understand what's going on in your body as well, and what needs to be worked on specifically when it comes to your stress response. And then lastly, I would just say when it comes to autoimmune disease, but also stiff person syndrome, they have shown that certain viruses can cause the autoimmune response to occur in the body, and there are various mechanisms that can happen, and it can happen with viruses like Epstein-Barr Virus and Cytomegalovirus, and there are lots of other viruses that can have this effect in the body. And when we have those viruses present, they can cause your body to not only respond and activate against those viruses, but also to become reactive to any self-tissue that has a similar look or pattern to it, and your body is just going to respond to that. And there are certain genetics on your HLA genes which you can get tested for. If you have genetic variations in those HLA genes, it means that your body is more likely to create an inflammatory response to either self-tissue or compounds that your body makes, because it's just not working as optimally as somebody that doesn't have that genetic variation. So that can be something that you can look into, because when it comes to autoimmune disease, we know there is a genetic susceptibility, but unfortunately there isn't a specific gene that can be tested. But we know it's a mix of certain genes, including these HLA genes, which present things to the immune system. So we know when they're not working appropriately, it means that they can end up presenting the wrong thing to the immune system, and that's why the immune system starts firing up against self-tissue. As it is with stiff person syndrome, it's causing an immune response to GAD. And you can see it just has this knock-on effect to so many different aspects in the body. And by reducing the autoimmune response and dealing with the root cause of that autoimmune response, it can completely reduce your symptoms, but you need to get to the root cause. And I am sure with time, there will be more research done into stiff person syndrome. We know Celine Dion is investing in some research which hopefully will provide more insight into what is causing it, what triggers it in the first place, and what can be done from either a natural perspective or with medication to really get this under control. And I hope Celine Dion finds the answers and that she is touring and singing again, and she deserves that wholeheartedly. She's brought so much joy to so many people, and she's certainly brought joy to me, and I'm so grateful to her for that. I feel very sad about what she's going through at the moment, and I'm just hoping that they will find answers. If you have any questions about stiff person syndrome or any other systemic autoimmune condition like lupus and scleroderma or vasculitis, and you would like to ask me a question about that, then feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram account, which is at the Autoimmune Nutritionist. You can also join my free group, the Autoimmune Forum, where I'm sharing lots of information over there. I do lots of writing and like to share recipes and like to ask questions, and we all come together as a community. So I'd love to see you over there. And as I said, you can download that anti-inflammatory recipe guide. It's a 5-day recipe guide. So you get 5 breakfast, lunch and dinners, and I'm constantly updating it as well. So look out for that, and have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me today on the Autoimmune Reset. I really hope you enjoyed the discussion, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you liked it, I would hugely appreciate a review on iTunes, as it helps me understand what you like about the podcast and to help share the information with more people. I'm excited to speak to you next time, and remember, you have the power to take the reins on your health. So keep the faith and celebrate the small wins. Until next time.